emotional instability in you that surrounds the truth entering you or being presented with truth is a part of a lack of understanding about the way. You see, when we receive truth and we really understand the benefit of truth, when we fully understand the benefit of truth, and thank you for those that cleaned my whiteboard during the break, when we fully understand the benefit of truth, we never respond to it in the manner that most of us do, continue to respond to truth. Most of us have this very cyclical, or we should say, if we can call this midpoint here, let's call that emotional stability, shall we? And above there, let's call it positive, happy, desirous, and also a feeling of hopefulness and a feeling of passion for the subject. Many of us have that with some subjects, but unfortunately, if we look at the negative side, if we can call that side a feeling of hopelessness, despair, despondency, and those kind of emotions, many of us, after other subjects, and particularly after the subject when we talked about our spirit life while we're asleep, in the sleep state, that was very noticeable, we go into this place of despondency, despair. And many times what we're attempting to do is we want truth to always feel good. Have you noticed that? And there is in fact that definition that on the natural love path that most of us have absorbed, and that is that if it's the truth, it will always feel good. There's this thought that we have that truth will always feel good rather than just feel. So we have this belief system that for something to be truth, it has to feel good. And so therefore, every single time we're presented with something that has a flavour to it that causes us to confront ourselves personally, particularly confronting our personal truth, there is this high tendency we have to resist and reject that particular truth. Now, this brings me to the topic of the second subject on this matter of the way that we want to discuss more about, and that is, remember the second one? It was about truth, isn't it? Having a passionate, longing, and desire for God's truth Now, I haven't said exactly the words I said right at the beginning because I want to add and embellish this thought a little. Remember that truth opens our soul to love. And in this case, let's be more specific, to God's love. You know, to open our soul to God's love, we need to begin to accept within ourselves God's truth. Now, God's truth is a wide subject, as many of you are now starting to understand more clearly. Divine truth permeates all parts of our life. It permeates our physical life. It permeates our scientific belief systems. It permeates our spiritual life, our emotional life, and all of our belief systems in both of those areas of existence. It permeates the scientific truths of the universe itself, as well as the truths about our own personal existence and our own personal state. It is all-encompassing. It has no holes. It has no loopholes either, as well as holes. The truth is such that it is the main force of power for good in the universe. Now, when I say it's the main force, I'm saying that the truth has its power because without it, love is not possible. You can't open your soul to love without truth being present. And for that reason, truth goes hand in glove with love, as the saying would go. So what we want to do with our feelings about truth is really check upon our feelings about truth. Now, on the natural love path, we have a tendency to absorb truths that are palatable to our taste buds from an emotional perspective. So we like the taste or the sound of it, and so we accept it. Whether it is actually truthful or not, we just gauge our level of acceptance is totally controlled by whether it feels good to us or not. And that is a problem. Because if the truth does not feel good to us for some specific reason, and I'll put to you later that actually many times the truth is not going to feel good to us, then we are not going to accept anything that doesn't feel good. We are not going to emotionally open to anything that doesn't feel good. And when we do that, we are severely limited in our ability to receive love. Because remember the role of truth on your soul. The role of God's truth is to actually physically create the opening. So if you imagine this is your soul, and then this is the hard shell, eggshell around the outside of your soul, where you've become self-reliant and you're not going to let anything in unless it feels good. Right? What truth does is it creates a vortex or an opening somewhere in that allows us to have a way in which other external information can infiltrate the soul. Truth actually creates this opening. It breaks down the hard shell of lies and untruth and resistance, and instead creates a permeable layer within our soul that allows things to go through it. It's a bit like osmosis. You've heard of osmosis? You've heard of probably reverse osmosis, which is a way of filtering water. But osmosis allows liquid to penetrate through what is seemingly an impermeable membrane. And what we need to do is, truth is the thing that opens our soul to allowing the love to actually flow into it. It creates this gap or this opening in our hard shell. Without truth, our soul is condemned to stagnation. And yet, so many of us still hate hearing the truth. And that is an indication that we are addicted to the natural love path, the broad way. Can you see that? You see, if we really, at the emotional level, understood the importance of truth in our day-to-day lives, would we be as resistive to it as we currently are? Now, I am not talking about somebody coming along and telling you the truth, yabbering at you about what they perceive the truth to be. I am talking about the truth actually being a part of your soul, actually inside of your soul itself. So remember earlier in our presentation today, there was a series of questions asked about different subjects. One was about anger, another was about free will and so forth, right? And in each case, the asking of the question demonstrates that the truth about that subject has yet to enter my soul. Because if the truth about that subject has entered our soul, there's no more need to ask questions about the subject. Now that makes sense, doesn't it, from a logical perspective? Like if you knew everything there was to know about building a car engine, then you would be able to build a car engine from scratch even if that meant manufacturing the parts and everything else, and you'd know what to do, you'd know what materials you'd need, you'd know where to get them from, you'd know everything about the subject. And once you know everything that there is to know about a particular subject, then you can do quite easily, can't you? You can create quite easily. Everything changes from that time. Now, we could argue that many of us don't know everything there is to know about any particular one subject. But the reality is, if you had 1,000 years to learn about a car engine, do you think after 1,000 years you'd know a fair bit about it? Well, of course you would. Most guys on the planet, my own father knows a fair bit about engines generally. He's worked on them all of his life. And he's now, I think he's turning 70 I think it's a few days' time, actually. His birthday's in December or January. I can't quite remember which, because he doesn't celebrate his birthday. But he's 70 years of age, and for a good 50, 60 years of his life, he's spent working on car engines. So he has a pretty good working knowledge of those particular things. Imagine if you added another 1,000 years onto that. By the end of that, you'd know a fair bit about the whole subject, wouldn't you? About how far you could go with an internal combustion engine. And as a result of that knowledge, we can absorb and be familiar with all the knowledge, but we can also create quite well once we have that particular knowledge. Now, my father, in his desire to understand the engine, never felt any fear about the subject. I've seen my father be so absorbed with an engine, in this case a model aeroplane engine, that he actually stuck his finger through the propeller while it was going in order to adjust the fuel. And he finished up ring-barking 2 of his fingers and having to have 70-something stitches to put all the skin back on and flesh back on from those 2 fingers, just because he was so absorbed in the subject, or you could say also a little spirit influenced in the subject, obviously, to be so out of his body and not be aware that this screaming engine was still going in front of him while he was putting his hand through it. But he was so absorbed in the subject that he could even do something like that. He had no fear at all of that blade spinning around at 15,000 revolutions every minute. No fear at all. Didn't cross his mind. But that's what sometimes the passion does, isn't it? Like, you don't have any fear at all. And sometimes we take that to an extreme on our planet. We don't even have any sense of ourselves as a result of that. But obviously, if we were connected with ourselves, we'd at least have a sense of ourselves. But we often have no fear about any subject that we desire passionately to investigate. And I put to you that if we have fear about receiving divine truth, then we may not be as passionate about the subject as what we believe. Can you see that? Because why would you have fear about something that's going to transform your life into something beautiful? Obviously, we don't think it's going to transform our life into something beautiful. That's why we have the fear associated with it. Can you see? So what we need to start doing with regard to this subject of truth, the whiteboard's just not wanting to come off, is it? The reason why what we need to do is we need to start questioning ourselves to a degree here. So we need to ask ourselves questions about what is really our passion and desire when it comes to truth. Do we have a passionate longing for it if we have so much fear surrounding it? So the question we need to ask ourselves is this: can desire and fear be in harmony if we long for truth. So if we really, really want truth, can we desire it and fear it at the same time? Is what I'm asking. And if I fear it, can I see that that must be hugely limiting my opening of my own soul? Can you see that? Now, if my soul has to be opened by truth in order for me to receive divine love, and if divine love is the transforming power of the soul, then can you see that unless I open the door to divine love flowing, I am forever consigned to be the limit of what I can be, the finite creation that I was originally created as, the sixth dimensional being. That's as far as I can go with my development. Can you also see that unless I'm willing to open the door to God's truth about every single subject, including my own condition, I am limiting the flow of divine love into my own soul. I am using my will, my free will, we often call it, that God gave us to use. I'm using my will to stop or prevent or resist the flow of love into my soul. And we need to be honest here. Many of us still think we can ask questions in fear. Many of you come up to me and say, the very first words out of your mouth say, I'm really afraid to ask you this, but. And you know what I'm tempted to say almost straight away? Go away and come back when you're not afraid to ask it. Because when you're afraid to ask things and then you go ahead and ask, the truth of what's being said to you will not enter you. Because your fear prevents it from entering. For many of us, the reason why we ask question after question, and many times for many of us we have asked the same question over and over again, is not because we want to know the answer, but rather it's because we want a different answer than the previous one that was given. Does that make sense? That is the case for many of us. Joy, you would like to?